Welcome to Seminar Sunday, District 21's weekly episodic webinar series. Thanks for joining us on this special edition on Father's Day 2019. It is June 16th, a great day to join us here for the Toastmasters International Annual Business Meeting Preview. I'm your host, Michael Bound, Program Quality Director with District 21. And through the next hour, we will be discussing some of the proposals, ideas, and of course, candidates that will be running for the Toastmasters International Board this August in Denver, Colorado. This is part of a weekly series of webinars that District 21 hosts. We only have 2 meetings left until the end of the program year. So next week we will be discussing goal setting and planning. And the following week we will be talking about how we are 1 year away from the deadline on the traditional program and whether you are on track to achieve the Distinguished Toastmaster designation by June 30th, 2020. So lots of good topics coming up besides this evening. But it is great to have everyone on the line this week, and we hope that this will be insightful, a good chance to ask questions and find out exactly what this means for us as members and leaders here in District 21. What we're going to talk about then is 3 things, really. We're going to talk about what is this annual business meeting that I've referred to, how your club is able to have its vote count at the annual business meeting, which of course is very important. One thing to recognize is that the clubs are the members of Toastmasters International, and so the clubs are the ones that hold the votes. And of course, we're going to also do a quick overview of the candidates and the proposals that are being voted on this year. I encourage interaction through this, so if you've got questions, ideas, thoughts, don't hesitate to share them. That will certainly add value to this conversation over the course of this hour together. So the annual business meeting, what is it? Well, first of all, because Toastmasters is a great nonprofit organization that we are members of, or we're members of clubs, rather, of Toastmasters International, each year we have an annual business meeting to vote on any changes to the governing documents. So those would be things like the policy and procedures, the club constitution, the district administrative bylaws, etc. So there's a series of governing documents that you can find on toastmasters.org. If you go to Leadership Central and then on to governing documents, that is where you would locate all the governing documents that determine what our organization does in various situations. It's the rule of the law, so to speak. So that is one of the things that we determine every year at the annual business meeting. And of course, we also need leaders, such as our international president and the board of directors. We vote for various international level leaders each August at the convention. So between those 2 items, that is really the purpose of that meeting. The international president chairs the meeting, and it's usually a relatively extensive meeting, but it's only 1 meeting a year. And this year it will be held Friday, August the 23rd, 2019, from 4:30 p.m. to 9 p.m., and that is Mountain Time, because of course it'll be held in Denver, Colorado, as part of the International Convention. So the International Convention, for those of you that have not had the privilege of attending, is a large show focused around a number of things. There's, of course, the International Speech Contest, which has the World Championship of Public Speaking. There's also the Accredited Speaker Program, the finals for that. So for those folks that are looking to get a professional speaking designation through Toastmasters International, they compete there. I guess it's not really competing, but they are scored, and that determines whether or not they meet the criteria to become an accredited speaker. There are also lots of things to do with the candidates. So during the opening ceremonies, I believe it's the opening ceremonies, at least the candidates are paraded across the stage and introduced. There's booths set up to interview candidates or ask some questions and find out more about them. There's a full showcase about candidates, and they get up and they speak for several minutes about some of the things that matter to the organization to get an idea of where the candidate lies, what are their beliefs in serving our organization. And then the business meeting, of course, also takes a huge part of the convention. Besides that, lots of educational sessions. There's regional gatherings as well, and lots of other activities that Golden Gavel as well is given out each year. Action-packed Wednesday through Saturday, and usually the business meeting has historically been on the Saturday, but this year they've moved it to the Friday evening. So that's just some background information about what the business meeting is. Does anybody have any questions just about that, about the premise of the business meeting or things surrounding it?
Was the change in date from Saturday to Friday because of the change in the semifinals, the quarterfinal semifinals?
That's a strong possibility. There's a number of things that have been shuffled around because, of course, that is a cultural change. So to give some further context to that, in the past, the Thursday has largely taken up most of the day with semifinals, because what would happen is we had 10, I believe it was, yes, 10 semifinals throughout Thursday, and we'd run them three or four at a time, 3 times during the day. So of course you've got like a morning, midday, and evening. Most of the time you can't have anything concurrent because, you know, with 3 contests happening, if people are going to go to an activity, they're probably going to go to one of the semifinals and watch those. That has been eliminated this year, with the exception of having 1 semifinal. So I believe that is kind of a domino effect. The other challenge that we've had oftentimes is the business meeting does not always run on time. We've had challenges, particularly thinking back to years like Washington, D.C. in 2016, where there was a lot of issues with the machines in particular. So the votes weren't getting registered. Instead of having a paper ballot, you register with a digital machine, which of course speeds things up when you're dealing with thousands and thousands of votes. So I do think that is a domino effect. Thanks for that question, John. So that is the business meeting. Now, how are we involved? Well, there's a couple of ways that we get the privilege to vote. The most common way, of course, is through our member clubs. And note, I will call it member clubs because going back to what I said right near the start is something that not everybody consciously thinks about. But if you ever ask somebody, are you a member of Toastmasters International? The correct answer to that individual is more than likely no, because the members of Toastmasters International are the clubs. They're the franchisees, you could call it. And members of the club are members of the club. They're not members of the international organization. So the voting privileges go to the clubs. Each club, I believe, carries 2 votes to the international convention. So that is their entitlement to be represented, as long as they're a club in good standing, of course. So if they've been, if they're not in good, they haven't paid their dues, or they're suspended, etc., they're not eligible to vote. But any active, fully paid club is eligible to vote. There are other people that can vote, and they carry a single vote, and those are delegates at large. So that would be the full Toastmasters International board, which comprises of the executive committee, and the executive committee would be your international president, the immediate past international president-elect, second vice president, and first vice president. So that's the executive committee, those 5 roles. And all the international directors, which there's 14, 1 representing each region. The past international directors and presidents of past carry on their voting rights for the rest of their time as either members of Toastmasters or basically as long as they live, as long as there is nothing that disqualifies them. And we won't get into that because it's very unlikely that would happen. Governing documents, of course, does cover off those circumstances. District directors also are delegates at large and have 1 vote. And that is because district directors for the 116-ish districts we have around the world all are registered as officers of the international organization. So when you look at district officers, there is actually a distinct difference with the district director in that sense, as they are the only district officer that becomes registered with the international organization and therefore have that entitlement to vote. Again, it's one vote though for the district director. So here's the important thing though, because of course you know who has their votes. You know that the board and the past board members and the district directors all carry votes. Great. Okay, that's easy peasy. But your club only gets a vote if you assign a proxy. What's important here, and this is different from a district, is the proxy that you assign is available to any member of Toastmasters, Toastmasters Club, that is, sorry. It is not like the district where it has to be a member of your club. So the difference is in a district council, the VP Education and the president have the vote. They're the ones that carry votes to district council and can vote on business at the district level. At the international level, the members of Toastmasters International are the ones that have the votes, which means the clubs. So the ability to assign a proxy for the international level is restricted to the president and secretary. If any other officer attempts to sign in and assign a proxy, they will not see this option whatsoever. If you are a president or a secretary or supporting your president or your secretary, this is what they need to do. They simply need to log in to the Toastmasters.org website, navigate to Club Central, which is of course the same place they would go to submit an education award or update the club's information or pay member dues. So it's definitely somewhere that club officers should be pretty familiar with, considering it's the main way to get all of that information in, unless you are mailing things to world headquarters. From there, those two roles will see a club proxy assignment. Now that will not show up, of course, until at least July 1st, because it will be next year's officers that have that ability. I don't know how far into July, though. It may take a little bit longer before it actually becomes available. And I will try to communicate that out as quickly as possible whenever I get wind that it's available. So those that are keen to jump in and send it in have that ability to go in and assign a proxy. Now, I had some trouble finding a screenshot of what that looked like, because I know it's changed a little bit over the last couple of years, the exact user interface. For those of you that have been around a while, you'll actually notice if you log into Club Central, it looks very different than it did, say, 5 years ago, or even 2 years ago for that matter. It's a little more of a user-friendly interface, nicer looking, same functionality for the most part, but the look is very different. There are three things you'll have here. So I've got a screenshot up right now of what it looks like. There is sending a club delegate, which of course would be someone from your club that's going to vote on your club's behalf. So obviously the best choice if any member of your club happens to be attending. Great opportunity for them to go see what the business meeting's like, experience it, and really truly represent your club. They do need to be there in person though, so that is important that they are aware of their responsibility. Make sure you ask before signing it to them that they're willing to attend, because a lot of people, historically more so a problem on the Saturdays, would say, hey, I've got a flight out, actually can't make it. And it's unfortunate because you can't come up to, for example, myself in August and say, hey, I've got my machine to vote, but I'm actually not going to be there. I can't take that. So it is really important that you talk to your club member first and let them know when it is. It's the Friday evening, 4:30 to 9 p.m. And if they're not committing 100%, then definitely look at the other two options. Another option is designating any active Toastmasters. So let's say you knew somebody in town that was going, then they can definitely hold the vote as well. And finally, there's the district director. And what happens is there'll be either the district director or the next highest ranking officer, so program quality director, club growth director, in attendance carries the votes. And that's typically what happens for a high percentage of the clubs, because most clubs, of course, don't have somebody going and may not necessarily know somebody else that's going. I don't know the exact percentage of how many go to the district director versus the another member over the years. But certainly those are all options. And what I will say as the incoming district director, and what I've seen as program quality director and club growth director as well, is there is a lot of homework done on the candidates by the district leadership team. They all have interviews with the candidates and usually do a little more research beyond that as well. And a caucus is held on site, and that's regardless if people have votes or not. It's a great time to discuss. Not only that, but clubs can actually, after you click on this, I don't have a screenshot of what it looks like after this, but let's say you picked any of them. You'll have the ability as well to put in who to vote for and how to vote for the proposals. If you put that in, then that means the person voting on your behalf must follow the direction you've given. So let's say, for example, you gave the direction to vote for candidate number 3. No matter what happens, even if they fall on their face and they turn out to be, you know, a terrible candidate from everybody else's opinion, we vote for candidate 3. So what will likely happen in my place, for example, is I'll have potentially a couple hundred votes, and I may personally, from the interviews and the research I've done, think, you know what, this is probably the best candidate that's going to serve our organization the best. I'm going to vote, say, I don't know, let's pretend it's 200 votes I have, and 20 have been assigned to the other person. I'm going to vote 180 for this person and 20 for the person that I don't necessarily support, because that is the expectation of the person holding your proxy. So I want to make sure that's clear. It's a good feature if you know for sure. The only thing I do caution is make sure you do your research on all of the candidates and the proposal, and or whatever it is that you're you're noting down to vote, because that is not a preference. That is you must vote this way. And I've seen that before. I know, Sean, you were in that position as well, of course. You've seen it where there's a certain number of votes that are designated to a certain person. And that can become a little bit of a challenge, because you may realize quickly that maybe they're not the best candidate for the role, and there's nothing you can do about it. You don't necessarily know if the club's done their research or whether they just, you know, how they came to the determination. Was that your experience?
Yes, it is. And the only thing you can really do is you vote towards what the members directed you to, at least on the first ballot. The second ballot, everything's up for grabs.
Yeah, that's another challenge as well, of course, is if you had more than 2 candidates, if the candidate that a club has asked you to vote for drops out first, then it puts you in a little bit of an interesting predicament, because you don't know what they wanted next, which is the same thing really in terms of a lot of people. They decide how they're going to vote as their first preference, but then you know, what do they do after that? It's always, there was one year, I think that was Washington DC as well, where we had 5 candidates for second vice presidents. You can imagine, you know, everybody goes into that first round of voting knowing who they want to pick. And then as soon as somebody gets eliminated, that gets tricky. And then, oh, their next favorite candidate gets eliminated. Oh, we didn't discuss this. That didn't happen to our team, but I know it happened to a lot of teams where they, you know, they pick their favorites, and you don't necessarily go all the way down the line. So, and I don't think you have an option to pick more than one, put an order to it. So I do see a couple of questions in the chat. I saw one from Sean. How do clubs become entitled to have their 2 votes? And I think I covered that was.
That wasn't me. I think that's Jan. Someone else. Oh. I got my name on mine, so someone else.
Oh, okay. Sorry, there's a lot of District 21 Toastmasters. Okay, so they are entitled to their votes by having their club in good standing. That's the only requirement, as far as I know anyways, that the club has to be in good standing. So if it's for any reason out of good standing, whether that's for membership payments or some sort of serious violation, they will not have the ability to carry their votes. And Jim has also asked, can only the president do the club proxy assignment? No, it is the president or the secretary that can do it, but only those two. So somebody that's VP Education or any of the other roles will not be able to even see the option where they would go in to click on the club proxy assignment. So it's important to note that, because I've seen that happen before too, where club president says, hey, VP Education, do you think you could submit this for me? No, they literally can't unless you share logins, which is probably not a good idea. So that's how you ensure your club is registered to vote through any of those channels, and hopefully that's a real nice thing for you to consider as well, that you can actually tell whoever you're sending to vote how to vote. If you really feel strongly about, whether it be one candidate or all candidates, you have that ability. Just keep that power that you have in mind, that if the team finds that for whatever reason they think that really this candidate is, they really said some weird things in the interview, we still vote for that person based on your direction. So very good if you feel comfortable in the decision. If you're kind of not sure, you're just like, oh, well, I want to help them out and give them some ideas who to vote for. It's not an idea. It's a direction that you're giving to the either the member of your club, the active Toastmaster member, or the district director. So let's start with the elections for the board, and I'm not going to provide a lot of context. I'll give you a little bit of information about who's who in the zoo, so to speak. But in terms of the individuals, I'm not going to speak very much on, because of course that would not be fair. We need to be fair and objective. I believe that all the candidates have great skill sets, and I'm always so impressed with the caliber of leaders that we see on our board of directors. And yeah, I think we win no matter what. It's incredible. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a moment. So this is not really elections, but just to kind of go through those executive committee positions that are out there, and they've went through the process of getting elected, and now they're kind of in their final years on the board. So Lark Doley, who's our current international president, will move into the immediate past international president role at the international convention on the Saturday, the day after the business meeting. And that is her final year on the board of Toastmasters International, and then she becomes a free agent and does whatever she wishes to do within the organization. So that is our Lark Doley, current international president. As she moves out, Deepak Menon of New Delhi, India, will move in as the new international president. Again, that will be the same time on the Saturday evening. They usually run a kind of a formal inauguration, and then they have a celebration to celebrate the new president on Saturday night that involves dinner, dancing, etc. Now, the interesting thing about the international president-elect candidate is there is only one. And in order to qualify for this role, you essentially need to serve in the position prior. So it's actually funny that we have elections for this, but we do. There's a couple of positions like this. International president-elect is one of them. So at this very moment, Richard Peck of Seymour, Connecticut, is our first vice president of the international organization. He will stand for the international president-elect position, and then move forward from there, of course, to the president and immediate past international president. The next person would be the first vice president candidate, and that is Margaret Page of Delta, British Columbia, Canada. So she is currently second vice president. She won out of, I believe it was three nominated candidates and two floor candidates, I want to say, last year. And so now basically, because she's got into that second vice president position, again, to qualify for first vice president, you essentially have to serve as second vice president for the most part. So it's almost always, in fact, I've never seen it with more than one candidate to move forward. And Margaret Page, of course, happens to also be a member of our District 21, as well as our friends to the north in District 96. She's in 2 of our clubs here in District 21, one in Tawasin and one in Richmond. There are 3 nominated candidates for second vice president. I'm not aware right now of anyone running from the floor. It is possible to run from the floor as well. You must have served as an international director in order to qualify to run for second vice president. But in order to run from the floor, you also need to have went through the International Leadership Committee. That's a new rule as of the last couple of years. So in this case, if you decided that, you know what, I want to be international second vice president, you can't just stand up in the business meeting and nominate yourself or get somebody to nominate you. You have to have went through a process, been declined, or in this case for these 3 individuals, accepted, and then you can run for the position in either case. That being said, being a nominated candidate means a lot for the international organization, because as you can see, we have 3 people here that are very well qualified for the role. And because they've been nominated, it makes it very challenging to compete against them if you were running from the floor, because the International Leadership Committee, made up of past international directors and past international presidents, really, they've done their homework. They've spent hours and hours and hours researching these individuals before determining who the suitable candidates are. I have thus far had a chance to talk to both Matt Kinsey and Russell Drake on the phone just last week. Hopefully talk to Magnus sometime soon as well. 3 incredible gentlemen I have so much respect for, and both the individuals I've spoken to already are very much complimentary of each other as well. I mean, I remember Russell saying to me, me, Matt, and Magnus, we're buddies. And I thought that was so cool that, even though they're running for such a high profile position in the organization that will lead them to international president, they're friendly about it and not fighting. It's very different than traditional US politics if you watch that. And like Sean didn't even laugh or anything at that one. Gee.
Well, I did, but I was on mute.
Oh, okay. It's so true, though. I remember we had a contestant as well competing at the international semifinals, and she just couldn't believe the team spirit there of the contestants competing against her that were actually running around this room that they were going to compete in, listening to all the different speakers to make sure she sounded good in all of them. So sportsmanship is a big part of Toastmasters, and just so happy to see that at that level, because it's not every organization you would see that in for sure, and U.S. politics definitely not. So that is the second vice president candidates. Now I'm going to bring up a list of all the candidates for international director here as well, and pictures of them. You will notice numbers on each side. That is the region that they would represent. An important thing here to understand is that an international director does not actually just serve that region. Sometimes you'll see that somebody's labeled them International Director Region 3. Their real title is actually just International Director. They serve the world on the board, and they are all equal in that aspect, all 14 of them. They represent a region that they come from. So it's important, of course, in a global organization like ours to have people from different parts of the world to give that true global organization viewpoint, rather than everybody from the same city or same club. That would definitely not be a global view. That would be an individual club's view on how things should be led. So that's what the numbers represent. They don't represent that person only serves on the board in that region. It means that they are on the board for the whole world, and they just happen to be representing that region. So every year, to keep things fair, I guess you could say, and have some keep the elections relatively short, have some continuation each year, they only replace half the board. every year. So board members serve for 2 years before they leave the board. What happens, of course, is your first year, you're kind of a junior member of the board, and then the second year, you're more of a senior member of the board. And this year, we're electing the odd number regions. You'll see all those numbers are odd numbers. Next year, we go back to even numbers, etc., back and forth each year. So Region 1 is this year, which is our region. District 21 is home to Region 1. Region 3 is down in the central area of the U.S. I'm thinking Kansas, Oklahoma. I believe it's part of Texas. Region 5 is also part of Texas, and can't remember exactly where else. Region 7 is kind of towards some of the southern states, the Carolinas, for example. Region 9 is up more towards the New York area. Region 11 is Europe, and Region 13 is Southern Asia area. So both those candidates, in fact, happen to be from India. So India is definitely a big part of Region 13. So those are the candidates for the board. We have usually 2 per person. That has been narrowed down in many cases. Just thinking in our region, for example, there was 4 people that put their name forward for the board. The International Leadership Committee squeezed that down to 2, and now, in our case, we have 2 very qualified candidates. We have Karen Knight from District 21 and Naomi Takushi from District 57 down in California. So both of them will go to the International Convention. They will meet with potential votees, I guess you could call them, and those individuals will decide, out of the 2, who's the better person, and they'll vote for them. And then, of course, one of them will succeed to the board, and the other one, I'm sure, will be behind the scenes supporting. So that's, once again, the great thing about the organization is no matter what happens, it's typically the way things went. Another quick side note on the international directors is a number of them have served as region advisors as well. That is not necessarily a benefit per se. Some people believe that, hey, that's what you should do, is maybe you should be a region advisor first. The region advisor program itself was actually created to open up a position for those that maybe aren't necessarily suitable for the board. So what happened in the past is board members would do both. They would support with the operational side and help district leaders serve their clubs and members. And they would also, of course, do the strategic planning, be an ambassador for the organization. But they split it apart, and I think this was about 2010, I want to say. And the region advisor was more for those that are better at operational instead of strategic. So you would go and just support districts, help build clubs, those types of things. The international director remains as an ambassador for the organization, and of course, a person at the table when it comes to discussions on policy, governing documents, etc. So that is kind of the change that's happened over the years. But the intention was not that being a region advisor would be a stepping stone, so to speak, to becoming an international director. So I just wanted to highlight that because there's a couple of people here that have been region advisors on there. I'm not going to name them because I certainly don't want to make it sound like you shouldn't vote for them, because they could be the best candidate for sure, no doubt about it. But that in itself does not necessarily mean that they are a better candidate. So we'll certainly, I know, for example, myself, when I go to Denver, I'll treat every candidate exactly equal. And, of course, I'll come in with some ideas based on phone calls with many of them. But I won't have my mind 100% made up until after the showcase, when, it's kind of getting close to the business meeting. So that is the candidates for the various roles. Is there any questions at all about how that works, or candidates, or anything along those lines?
Well, hopefully paying attention, because we want them to make sure that when they send in their proxies, that they have some background.
You know what? Like, honestly, if a club does their research and sends a whole slate of like, this is how I want you to vote, and for any of those proxies that I have, I'd be so honored to vote in however way that you want me to vote, as long as you've done your homework. But if you haven't, then it'd be kind of unfortunate, because obviously I'm doing a lot of homework myself. Doesn't mean I personally am going to have all the right answers. So that's why definitely need your support. And when we go to the convention, if any of you are attending, love to have you at the caucus to share your viewpoints on experiences you've had with the various candidates, or if you popped by the tables and found any information that was helpful in helping you make a decision, etc. So usually we get people as well like Pat Johnson, possibly Margaret Page, depending on what her availability looks like. They can really provide a broad viewpoint as well from their level, where they've worked with these individuals closer than you or I have. That was very helpful, for example, this past year. Okay, well, we'll move on to the proposals. So there are quite a few of them, and I'm going to keep it relatively high level just to give a broad spectrum overview of all of them. They are all available on the Toastmasters.org website. You just go to I think it's About Us, the first box in the Toastmasters.org website. Then from there, Board of Directors. And on the left-hand side, you'll see drop-downs for, of course, the candidates. And you can actually read each one of their bios, which I should have mentioned earlier. That will also help you understand a little bit more about their experiences and why they're running and what they believe in, etc. Some of them have great resources on their websites, etc. Same idea for the proposals, so there is actually an area called proposals, and you can read the specific wording in the governing documents that they're looking at changing. So if that's of interest to you to really digest it and kind of understand from a very high level what that looks like, then I encourage you, please go on in and have a look at that. I right now have not went in and read every single word of the changes. I'll make sure that even through preparing this, I've got a lot more information, but I'll have even more information by the time I go to convention to really understand what that means. And I encourage you to do the same. If you are attending and voting, make sure you have a full understanding. What they'll usually do at the business meeting, just to give you some context as well, if you haven't been, is they'll have microphones set up in two different aisles on different sides of the business meeting room floor. And they'll have an past international director rather stand and kind of supervise each microphone. They'll have people that want to speak to the motion on one side, and people that want to speak against the motion on the other side. And so you can line up and you can talk and ask questions about it if you need to, if you're a voting delegate. So very interesting in that aspect. Although I don't think there's anything shocking that are in the proposals. I don't think you'll find anything terribly earth-shattering, although if there is something you think is earth-shattering, make sure I'm aware, because if I think there's nothing earth-shattering, then that's probably scary if there is. Proposal A is about modernizing language. So one of the best things about this, I guess you could say, it makes me certainly sound like I'm for it, but I'm open to viewpoints as well, is using non-gender specific language. So they have areas where they talk about men and women improving communication skills. Of course, in today's world, that's no longer, it's funny, we went through an evolution as an organization from the time we started where it was just men. In the 70s, they added and women. And now they're like, well, wait a second, that's not really appropriate language for this day and age anymore. They're taking that out and changing it to individuals. So individuals is the new language that they plan to use there. Another thing is they want to standardize how they write numbers, for example. So if the number's under 10, they want to put the number, the digit in, as well as in brackets, I believe, or it could be vice versa, the actual written number. If it's over 10, they just put the digits. So little things like that in the conventions and how they write out numbers and those types of things is in that proposal. They clarify the terms of member. So going back to that idea of individual members versus voting members being the clubs, making sure that that is clear throughout the governing documents. correct role titles. So one of them, for example, was it'll refer to executive director currently, but we have called Daniel Rex our chief executive officer since 2013. So it's just some old language related to that they are updating, and that's most of it. Like I think there's other little minor tweaks here and there related to that, but it's more or less just cleaning up and modernizing the language, making sure that we're using the same consistency throughout the governing documents, which is always important to have some sort of styling that you keep to and consistency rather than jumping all over the place with how you use language in a document. So with that, are there any questions about changes in Proposal A? I may not be able to answer all of the questions because, of course, I don't have all of the wording in front of me, but I can always look up things and get back in touch as well if there's something we don't have the answer to at this very minute.
Not for me. It's pretty clear on the website when you go there.
Yeah, it is. It's really nice, by the way, if you ever get a chance to go in and have a look at the website. Reading through it, it gives you examples of the sections that they want to change, and then you can actually click on a link and see with it kind of what do they do? They cross out what's being removed and they add in a different color what's being added, so you get an idea exactly what it would look like. So that's A. B is getting rid of some redundant language, and I believe it just basically, instead of saying throughout the governing documents, I think it says from time, how the board has its right to perform its authorized duties from time to time, something like that. Instead, it's just going to say it has its right to perform its authorized duty any time of its choosing, except where otherwise noted. So just a clean up, I guess you could call it there as well, in terms of making it sound like it's from time to time, which is really anytime anyways in practice. Start and end times for terms of office. I have actually heard some controversy around this one, which is interesting. Basically, as all of us likely know, the program year runs from July 1st until June 30th. And that's just kind of been the way things have been for quite some time. So if you're a club officer or you're a district officer, you start on July 1st, away you go. What the board is proposing is that your start time is midnight and your end time is 11:59 p.m. I believe in the past it was like 12 o'clock was the end, 12 o'clock and 1 second was the beginning, if I remember correctly. So they've just decided to make it, you know what, as soon as midnight strikes, that's when you start your roll. When 11:59 ends, that's when your roll comes to an end. So it's basically moving at a second. And I'm sure there's some people on here that are not policy people, and you're probably thinking, really? This is something you're voting on 1 second? Yes, we are. It's interesting that the constant debate about, when does the day start? When does this start, right? So
it could actually be 1 minute. It refers to it as changing it out from being at 12:01 a.m. and terminate to being at 12 o'clock. So it's 1 minute, not 1 second. It's a whole minute. How much can you do in a second? Not much, but in a minute you can do.
Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, now I understand it. See, I've been enlightened as well. I thought it was a second different, but you're right. Okay, thank you. So it's a minute different, and yeah, so that's the main change. It's just making it kind of more consistent to the official definition of day. I think if you look up the definition of day, although I'm sure there's different sources of definition of day as well that will tell you different things. So this is the proposal as it stands. For officers, you would start immediately at midnight. Now, that would, of course, be your local time, but not really, because you will gain access to things like Club or District Central Mountain Time. So in principle, you may act based on local time, but the reality is it's really always everything is based off of Denver time, which is Mountain, 1 hour faster than BC. D, how members are notified of international dues changes. So they're just amending the bylaws to basically explained that dues changes must be announced in either the Toastmaster magazine or on the Toastmaster International website before the effective date. And it also goes on to say that they're clearly expressed that the financial obligations of clubs are the international dues, because of course that is important, that the clubs are paying their dues. So that is the main thing about that bylaw. It's important to note that that is not, the dues are not changing at this time. That is not part of the proposal whatsoever. It is simply just the way that they would notify in the event dues are being changed. So that is really important to emphasize, because as soon as you mention dues, people start to think, well, wait a second, does that mean they're changing? There's been no notification of dues changing. Haven't even heard whispers of it, and it even pointed out when you read the wording on the website that they are not saying the dues are changing. They are just saying that this is how they need to notify you of dues changes. E, change to the term board members. And you've actually heard me use this term a fair bit during this call, board members. In the bylaws of Toastmasters International, it still refers to director. And that's in relation to, of course, anybody that's on the board. But again, there is a difference. There's international officers, and that is, you know, those top 5, the international president, the vice presidents, the president-elect, and the immediate past international president. Then there are the directors. So there's 14 individuals that are directors. So if you're talking about all of them, then the umbrella term board members is more appropriate to use rather than director, because, you know, calling director suggests that maybe you're talking just about the international directors rather than the whole board, including the international president and other officers. So just clarification on that, using board members over just director. The next proposal, F, introduction of the term charged member. So a charged member does not mean in terms, it's not in reference to being paying for something. It's charged in some sort of violation of a provision of the Toastmasters International governing documents. So somebody that's been charged with something is just outlined separately as a different term. So of course, right now you've got the different definitions, you know, paid member in good standing, active, inactive, honorary, as you see on the screen there. This would be just another category of somebody, you know, if they've been accused of some sort of violation that perhaps has been referred to the disciplinary committee. I'm just hoping that none of us ever become charged members.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. You have to figure, because I don't think it would look good on your resume having it down there. Yeah, I'm a charged member.
Yeah, no, paid member is a good thing. Charged member is not.
Active is good too.
Yeah, absolutely. Proposal G is the definition of the term active membership. So that flows into that nicely. So individual membership, of course, has those different categories. And basically, they just want a definition for what is an active member. If you go and read through the governing documents now, you'll see it talk about what an inactive member is, what an honorary member is, a whole bunch of other things, but it doesn't cover explicitly more about what it means to be an active member. So they're just going to add that in a definition of that term. H, we're getting there, by the way. If anybody's thinking, boy, there's a lot of proposals, this is an unusually high amount of proposals. There's some years there's 1 or 2. This year they have apparently been just spitting them out, but as you can see, for the most part, they're not major changes. A lot of them are just little tweaks here and there to clean up some of the terminology. There's some that could certainly be a little bit bigger, but they're definitely not, you know, earth-shattering to the point the whole organization changes. In this H here, the international dues and fees versus club dues and fees. So this is getting into more about our obligation to pay dues to international and the difference between what club dues are and international dues. So it's, of course, helping to make it more clear what those three really are. You know, the Toastmasters dues, which encompasses everything, club dues, and then club new member fees, because some clubs, of course, charge new member fees above and beyond what Toastmasters International charges. Specifically, they're going to change the title of Article 3, and they're going to introduce a paragraph that indicates where in the governing documents the Toastmasters International dues and fees are defined and described. And I believe they're going to reorder things a bit as well to make more sense when you're reading it from, you know, Toastmasters and clubs dues and the differences between the two. Proposal I, outdated materials and committee designation. This one I actually found quite interesting when researching it a bit. So they're trying to remove references to outdated materials that no longer align with the current practices of Toastmasters International. So things like, you know, it's got in the next bullet there, the new member kit doesn't get sent out anymore. So removing that from the governing documents is what they're looking at, as well as renaming the club nominating committee to the club leadership committee, which is now brought into line with the district leadership committee and international leadership committee. So same function, just different levels of the organization. They changed the international nominating committee to international leadership committee quite a long time ago, I believe, and district leadership committee followed just a couple of years ago. So it's just aligning them all. That's really the major changes there. J, club management of individual memberships. So of course, as everybody knows, club members need to submit prospective members rather, need to submit a membership application, club votes on it, you decide to accept the member, send the application and fees to world headquarters, done. Currently it says club secretary is supposed to do that. But of course, in practice, I suspect most clubs don't actually have their club secretary do it. I know in clubs I've been involved with, it's either been the treasurer or VP membership typically, who's taking care of all that, you know, submitting, getting the member registered online and everything. So the board is proposing changing it to, this is the club constitution being changed, to allow a membership application to be filed with, by any club officer. So in other words, if you are the VP membership, this would now make it, I guess you could say, quote unquote, legal. Right now it's kind of a thing that's done, and I'm sure most people don't realize it's currently not. It's in the bylaws that it's supposed to be the secretary, but just changing it, cleaning that up. Any questions about that?
Just a comment, I think it's about time, but one of the things another concern I'd have is that for those clubs that have their own customized constitution or bylaws, I'm just wondering, how is this going to affect it? Because won't they have to amend their own if they want to keep it in line?
So what do you mean they have their own?
I thought the clubs were allowed to have their own bylaws, and they were supposed to follow the model, but they could modify them if they have.
Are you referring to the sections that you can amend on Club Central?
I guess that's it. Maybe that's it. So that won't affect this, and this will be another area that they can't amend. They will
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
This is currently an area that's not amendable, and it will remain not amendable. That just any club officer can do it.
Okay.
Okay. And we'll go on to K, speech contests. This is an interesting one. Basically, right now, it only says that inactive members of your club can't participate in the international speech contest, but they're just saying that all speech contests if the member is inactive. Inactive is used very, in the clubs I've been part of, is used very loosely, though. I don't know if any of you are part of a club that has a strict inactive member policy. The silence is suggesting you don't.
I am not.
It is an area, that is an area you can amend on Club Central, actually, the definition of inactive member. And supposedly you can have inactive member dues and things like that. If they're not active, I suspect they'll not be willing to pay extra dues. But anyways, I guess it's a way to help people move on if they're not active and contributing to the club. So that is just a small modification there in that sense. And then L, I believe this is the final proposal, actually. Made it all the way to the final proposal. So there's just several structural concerns that they're looking at for the 3 levels: corporate, international, and district. So for example, if you look at board meeting minutes, you'll see often that it's the secretary treasurer signing off on it. But in reality, the secretary and treasurer roles, quote unquote, is taken by different people, different employees in world headquarters. So what's interesting is the organization is much like a club in they do appoint somebody to be their secretary treasurer. Currently, they do not. It's not somebody that's hired just to be the secretary treasurer. A good example is a number of years ago, the secretary treasurer was our chief operating officer at the time, Sally Noel Cohen. So she is certainly not a, that's not her role to be secretary treasurer of Toastmasters International. It's just for the board, that's the role she took on. So because it's different employees that are actually effectively serving in kind of the finance and secretarial support, they've decided to separate it to secretary and treasurer components. Recognize that different work. And then international just talks about cleaning up, I believe, the qualifications and term limitations of individuals elected to the board. So just making sure that that is super clear. District. Right now, and this is something that some people may not even realize, districts can operate without divisions. So you could have just area directors reporting to the district team and have no divisions. That is something that they're looking at changing because no districts for many, many years have decided to exercise the right to operate without a division. So they're basically just taking that out of the bylaws then, and divisions will be a continued structure, a required structure because of how integral they are part of the district structure. And speaking from somebody with a couple of years here of district leadership experience, I can't believe I can't imagine rather how challenging that would be to operate without division directors. That would be so difficult to have 30-odd area directors working directly with you and making sure they have the support that they need to be successful. So that's just my perspective.
Especially if they're odd.
Odd?
Well, you said 30-odd, so yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, they could be. Thanks for that. Any questions about this one? All right. Well, I apologize for keeping you just a couple minutes late here, but I want to thank everybody for your participation, listening in on this session, and hope that you've taken some nuggets out of this and look forward to hopefully seeing you at that business meeting. But if I don't, then make sure you get those proxies assigned. And if you have any questions or thoughts, feel free to reach out. Always happy to provide some insight. And of course, don't hesitate to provide those directions on how to vote for various candidates, as long as they're well researched. And with that, I will say good night, everyone.